In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. It's creepy in here, Chris. I'm in the office today, the Daily Memphian office. Apparently, I'm the only one that is working today. I'm the only one in here. So I guess everybody else took the day off because I don't see anybody in here, but
Isn't it a frozen wasteland in Memphis this week?
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. There's ice all over the ground, so that's why I'm the only one in here. But no, I am back in Memphis. I am in the office. It is empty. There is a bunch of snow on the ground. So I was surprised my flight actually got from Dallas. I was in Dallas for the coldest day in Dallas history. The coldest day in Dallas history.
And
the
what
day
was
after
that?
Desmond Bane got his jersey retired. That was Tuesday, and it was like 20 degrees. It felt like 3. So nothing for you.
It was 3 degrees this morning when I walked to and from my neighborhood coffee shop, which was a sort of a heat wave because it had been in the negative teens earlier in the week. They actually canceled school here in St. Paul because of cold on Tuesday. And so, but it's warming up, man. It's 3 degrees now, but it's actually going to get above freezing this weekend. So things are changing.
So when you walk to the coffee shop, are you just adjusted to it, or are you just like bundling up? 2 scarves, gloves, everything.
I underestimated today. In the last few days when I've left the house, I've bundled up pretty much. You know, when you get into negative temperatures, right? Like I'm pretty bundled. Today I was like, it's like 3 degrees. It's like 15 degrees warmer than yesterday. So I wore my heavy coat and I wore gloves, but no scarf, no like knit cap, just the cap I'm wearing, which you can see, but the listeners can't. No like cap over your ears. I didn't even button up my coat because I was wearing a sweater, and like it was fine for the most part. Then like my face started to hurt like in the last half block, you know?
Yeah. Well, there's been no games since we potted. There was a college game that I went to. There was an all-star game. There was no specific Memphis Grizzlies game. Oh, and also Chris, by the way, is surrounded by his dogs. So hopefully they don't interrupt this podcast.
Yeah, if the one next to me right now, who's the big dog who likes to bark, if she starts barking, I may flee to another room. But let's hope that doesn't happen.
Anyway, we had all-star festivities. I was in San Francisco. It was not that good of a time, honestly.
Yeah.
I wish it was more fun. The traffic was insane all weekend. It was very, very, very crowded. So logistically, it was very difficult. But Jalen Wells and Zach Kleiman played. They won, I guess, the Rising Stars mini tournament on their team. They ended up in the actual All-Star game. I'm not sure how much we need to really go over all the All-Star stuff again. There wasn't all that much to it, but I wrote a column. I found it enjoyable, at least, that Jaren has such a positive attitude sort of towards everything and gave a real effort.
Yeah, I think that maybe from a Grizzlies perspective, that's what stands out the most is not even, and I do like he had 2 blocks like in the game, good for him. What stands out the most from a Grizzlies perspective is not even like what people could see watching the stuff if they watch the stuff, which I'm not sure why you would, but it was what you got out of your reporting. I think was actually more productive than anything fans could see just by watching TV, and that was the sense that you were able to convey of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s personality and his comfort, you know, in that setting and sort of growing into his what's becoming sort of stardom a little bit with him.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Yeah, I think for media day, I didn't like Jaren got up there. You thought that he was going to end up getting asked a bunch of questions that were like silly and goofy, and that's usually what you get from All-Star Media Day. But Jaren actually got placed in like the quiet media room, which meant he was only going to talk for 10 minutes at the maximum. and the league wanted to be able to capture the video like uninterrupted, which suggests that he was one of the biggest stars on his team, right? Along
Right.
with like Anthony Edwards, who I don't believe played, but like, um, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was in the same room just minutes before Jaren walked in, right? And he's obviously the MVP frontrunner at this point. So it's suggested Jaren's stardom is getting bigger, but also, it sort of limited the serious or the goofy questions that he would get. But he stepped out of that room. He ran into these two kid reporters, and he called a famous YouTuber who's got like 25 million subscribers to like show off to the kids, and they had a great interaction with him, and they were like, I can't believe that, it was one of those things where Jaren, FaceTimed this YouTuber, his name's Jesser, and the kids were like, "Hi, we're big fans. Like, we love you. We're huge fans. We subscribe to your channel, whatever." And Jaren got a good kick out of it. And then afterwards, Jaren hangs up the phone and walks away, and the kids are turning around to their parents, going, "Mom, did you see that? Did you see who he called?" Like, it was like one of those like cute moments for kids, and I think it really showed
Right.
like Jaren's attitude in that situation, and just sort of how loose he was. And then on top of that, I mean, I don't want to say he's like a company man for the league, but he sort of is. Like, for him to actually play in the game, for him to say, "Hey, we want to play one-on-one? Sure, I'm in. I'll play soccer. I don't care. Like, whatever." He had a positive attitude. He definitely wasn't one of the players like, Shea or even Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown was like, "I don't even know how this works. Like, I'm here, but I don't even know how this All-Star stuff is working. I don't know what the format is this year." And Shea was like, "Yeah, I would like to play pickup ball, but I'm not going to be the only one." Well, Jaren was the only one playing defense, and he seems perfectly fine with that, being the trendsetter and not being
Oh,
the group think. I thought that was
that
cool.
that Grizzlies muscle memory, he was sort of picking up full court a little bit sometimes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. He said he was going to do it, and he ended up doing it. And then the other thing, before we get into just like second half of the season stuff, and I know you've had some mailbags that you've done. The other thing was the Desmond Bane jersey retirement, which was really fun and really cool, actually. First of all, just a good college basketball game to be at. Um, TCU pulls a top 10 upset, 69-66, and they're storming the court in Fort Worth. And Desmond Bane's like living and dying on every shot. Like, it was fun to see him just as a fan, right? And not as a player, because the emotional roller coaster, like as Texas Tech was making a push back late in that game, you could just see it on his face. So that was just kind of fun. And I just thought it was a really nice story because a few years ago, 3 years ago, I had the chance to go to Richmond and meet some of Desmond Bane's family for that first project I wrote, and they were there, so I was able to catch up with um, some of them and talk to Bane in the morning after his practice. And everybody that sort of was there at TCU that would talk about him, from people that work at the university, people that used to cover him back when he was there in Fort Worth, they all sort of say, we enjoyed uh, him being here not only because he was a great player, but just because, you know, this was where he sort of grew up, and so he became like the type of person that he is here. Des talked a lot about learning from Kenrich Williams, who plays on the Thunder, about like, all right, this is how you be a serious basketball player and do this as basically your job. He said, Kenrich got a dog, I got a dog. Kenrich got a girlfriend, I got a girlfriend. Like, this is where I grew up. But also, I thought it was just a nice story to, he had his banquet and he invited the ushers and he invited the janitors and he wanted everybody that had anything to do with his journey at TCU um, to be there. And if you go read the story, I thought that the quote from all of it was, he talked about the last time he had walked out of the tunnel at TCU, he was with his great grandmother who raised him, and she passed in 2021, I believe. So a year after he had his senior night at TCU, and he was like, that to me is what's going to be emotional, like the jersey and like all that, but just thinking about like now I'm walking out with my wife and my son as an adult. But the last time I was here was like the last sort of piece of my childhood. So it was fun. It was really fun environment, really fun to go out there and do that. But now we turn our attention to the end of the season, Chris. Um, I want to get into some of your mailbag stuff.
I mean, don't we have to talk about one of the other things you've written in the last couple of days? It's probably the thing fans are talking about the most.
I mean, I guess. Yeah, I'm burying the lead a little bit. Zach Kleiman responded to a request I made, asking him whether or not this Ja Morant report, I say report loosely, this Ja Morant,
Put air quotes around the word report here.
yeah, this Ja Morant mention in a podcast that potentially, if the Grizzlies were to fizzle out, it was from Howard Beck, who's obviously a well-respected reporter, who's president of the basketball Writers Association, right? So very respected and legit reporter, who said, I would keep an eye on. I had heard that from other executives that I would keep an eye on Ja Morant if the Grizzlies fizzled out. The Ja Morant could potentially be traded, and it was, Zach Kleiman was at the game in Fort Worth for Desmond Bane's jersey retirement. And it started there with just requesting that he comment on it because it happened to be the same day. And unlike the Grizzlies, which the Grizzlies typically do not do and do not have a history of doing, he decided to make a public comment and go on the record saying we are not going to trade Ja Morant. I'm pulling up the full quote because I don't want to misquote him here. I can't blame other, quote, air quotes, executives for fantasizing about us trading Ja, but it's just that, fantasy. We are not trading Ja. Continue to underestimate Ja, this team, and this city, and we will let our performance on the floor speak for itself. I'm not going to give this nonsense further oxygen and look forward to getting back to basketball. That's the message that he decided to send. I thought it was a strong message for certain. But what did you make of it?
I thought it was an odd and unusually strong message to put out, given the timing and given what he's responding to. Good for you to get him on the record on that. He does not go on the record very often, except for the beginning and end of seasons, and then the day after trade deadline. That's like about the only times he goes on the record. And so that was a great get by you to get him out there on that. But I found it somewhat odd, and I'm not even being critical. Like, I mean it like odd, like surprising, that he went out on the record that way in response to that thing. This is normal NBA stuff, man. The same podcast where Howard said, one executive said, "Oh, keep an eye on Ja Morant." He also mentioned Giannis Antetokounmpo as a guy to keep an eye on. People have been saying that about Giannis Antetokounmpo. There have been unnamed executives say, "Well, keep an eye on Giannis," for like the last 5 years, like constantly, and he's still in Milwaukee. This is what the NBA does. People look around and try to guess what star could be available, and like people did that for Karl Anthony Towns for like 5 years, and he actually finally got traded. But people were talking about that like 3 years before he got traded. Keep an eye on Karl Anthony Towns. I think this was barely a rumor. It certainly was not a report. It was like just a casual conversation. It's the kind of conversation you have around the bar, except like the microphone was on. And even when Howard was saying it, you could tell he was sheepish about saying it. It was like, don't, he actually said, "Don't aggregate this," which of course people did. A couple things. Let me do a quick response on both the Howard Beck side of this and the Zach Kleiman side. On the Howard Beck side, I can tell you, like, because I sort of went back and forth with a national NBA reporter who I'm friends with yesterday, not Howard Beck, but someone else. And like, I can tell you Howard Beck is not the only NBA reporter who went unnamed executive and said, "Oh, keep an eye on Ja Morant too." And that whatever executive said that to Howard Beck is probably not the only NBA executive who said something like that to an NBA reporter. It's just like a thing that people are chattering about, which does not mean it's anything real. Like I before that happened, I would have said there's very little chance the Grizzlies would trade Ja Morant next summer, and I still think there's very little chance that would happen. On the Zach Kleiman side of it, I just think it's odd to step out publicly on something like that, given that there was barely anything to respond to at all, and given the timing especially. typically when executive will go public about something like that, it's because there's an actual reported rumor. Like someone's actually reporting the team is contemplating trading a person, which is not really what this was. And B, it's in a moment where something could actually happen. Like it's like the weeks up to the trade deadline, or it's during the summer, during an actionable moment on the calendar. This is not an actionable moment on the calendar. The trade deadline was 2 weeks ago. They're about to play 28 games in the regular season in a playoff race and then play the playoffs. Who knows what's going to happen in the summer? Like, I literally think no one knows what's going to happen in the summer, including Zach Kleiman, who is the person who would do things in the summer. Like the idea that of saying, like in late February in a playoff race, we will do this or will not do this in July. I don't think anyone really knows what a team will do in July because so much will happen between now and then. Now, I believe the team at present moment has zero interest in breaking up their core players. And I believe there is very, 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 very little chance anything will happen between now and the end of the playoffs that will change that frame of mind. So I think Zach Kleiman is speaking honestly about the team's current frame of mind. But I don't think I know what I'm going to think in July. You know, I just find it an odd thing to be to sort of declare to declare so strongly, and that makes me wonder sort of why, right? You could say, well, you're trying to communicate to Ja that like not to worry about this, but you can communicate that privately, like that. You don't have to do that publicly. Is it like trying to communicate to a fan base? Like you think the fan base is taking this stuff way too seriously, which in social media they were, and you're trying to like calm that down? Is it you're just sort of annoyed because you just went through like 2 straight months of like being in the news constantly about this Jimmy Butler stuff that was not really real, and like you had to keep your mouth shut about that until it was over, and then you come out and say like that wasn't really real, which I think that was handled well? Are you just annoyed by all of that, and this is happening right in the aftermath of it? I just think it's an odd thing. This has not typically happened where a front office person will step out publicly about something this small during a moment where nothing can actually happen.
A few things here. One, I can't tell you for certain that I know exactly why Zach chose to make the statement. What I can say is if I were speculating, now I'm the one speculating, if
Yeah,
I were speculating as to why this happened, you know, I would probably say if you look at Ja Morant's history of just like viewing things on the internet and then
yeah,
turning around and using them or thinking a certain way about them because
sure,
it's visible on the internet, like better to publicly get out in front of that
yeah,
and just answer it right away and end it so that, you know, we've already seen Ja shut off the social media this year
right.
twice, right? So better to just like not even have that be a thing. I also think that for for people like us that follow the team incredibly closely, you know, we might see that report and initially and automatically sort of know, and this is just sort of the reality that we live in, know that that's just speculation or whatever. But then I was doing this yesterday. Like, all you got to do is go search Ja Morant's name on YouTube, and there's 20 videos that have 30,000 views of people saying the Grizzlies are now considering trading Ja. Like, this game of telephone gets out of
Yeah,
control so fast
yeah.
that it's just a way to stop it from happening. Like,
And
whether,
it's really a bummer because frankly, like I want like guys like Howard Beck on podcasts to be able to be a little loose and like give you some real behind the scene, real look at like the kind of conversations that people do have around the league. But when they get blown out of proportion so fast, so enormously and so instantly, it makes you just want to not like say anything. And again, if you go back and actually listen to that podcast, he as soon as it comes out of his mouth, you can hear the oh no, people are going to make this more than it is. Oh no, and they start laughing at him about it. Like, get out your phones, get it on social media. You know, it you're right. It's almost like Brian Windhorst does this all the time in his pods. He'll say, please don't aggregate this, and of course people do. These kind of conversations happen. Like we know we have these conversations sometimes. Like people just sitting around spitballing, like what might happen. You're speculating about stuff in the NBA, and that's all this is. Just people sitting around trying to dream up scenarios that could occur if certain things happen. Blah 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 blah. It happens all the time. This happened to happen with a star player of the Memphis Grizzlies, and so Grizzlies fans are noticing it more. And because it's a star player, it's getting more attention and more aggregation. But like, there's not a lot of there to it, you know?
I think that they also, they took an opportunity, maybe if you read the quote, to galvanize a little bit,
Yeah,
like that's how it reads.
yeah.
Like that again. This was I asked Zach. That was fully Zach's response. Like it did feel like it was a little bit of that, right?
Yeah, I certainly that seemed a little opportunistic to me, and maybe I know that plays well. That does like play well to fans. When I listened to the pod, and I heard that pod like before I subscribed to that podcast, so I had heard it like on its own terms, and I didn't. My reaction to it was, man, like they're really taking a shot at the Grizzlies franchise or taking a shot at Memphis, and how dare they underestimate the Grizzlies? That I just not got none of that out of that.
Well, I
But
don't even know if it was necessarily a response to the podcast itself, as a much as it is just like we're going to publicly make a comment about Ja Morant and we're going to say we're behind our guy. I
I
don't know if
I
it was like
I,
it
I
was
think you
a shot at the pod as much as it was just like we want to let Ja know we're fully behind him.
Yeah, no, I think you make the right point. The most important thing for the Grizzlies right now, and I talked about this on the radio with our colleague Jeff Calkins yesterday. As much as we can talk about all the other issues around the team, and we do, and we write about it and talk about it every day, and that's just what we do. The most important thing is for Ja Morant to be Ja Morant. It's for Ja Morant to play basketball more consistently and to be the best version of himself more consistently. And that is the single most important thing for this franchise. Certainly these next 28 games in the playoffs, but also beyond this. Ja Morant is a 25-year-old all NBA level talent on a long-term contract. That's the guy you try to win with. And I have no doubt that they are fully committed to trying to win with Ja Morant now and going forward across that contract. And so given that it has been a little bit of an up and down season for him in a lot of ways, which we've talked about, which we've written about, and given that you need to get that on track and in the right direction, and given the sensitivity, not only that he has, but the sensitivity just around him, right? Like, I do think that's probably why you sort of like take a sledgehammer to a housefly, which is basically sort of what happened to me.
Let's just point out some things that are obvious, right? There, a few obvious things that we're just going to throw out in the universe. One, for the Grizzlies to win a championship, they need the best version of Ja Morant, and like that's under their current construction. If the Grizzlies are to win a championship, they need Ja, and they need Ja to be at the absolute best that he can be. It's not going to be enough to win without him. So like he's incredibly important to the team. That's one. Two, Ja's an incredibly popular player in a market that is a small market
Yep.
that sells tickets, that is box office, that is, one of the most exciting players in the league, and like clearly means something to the community and the franchise from a value perspective.
Yep.
That's two. Two very obvious things, like two very obvious reasons. And so like look, I knew that all this was just Howard Beck throwing a comment out there. Like I knew that was it. Like I knew the Grizzlies weren't seriously considering trading Ja Morant like at the trade deadline. Like that was never something that they even considered doing. Um, but with that said, like I think going forward, you look at the deal that Ja's on, like for a player that's that caliber of player or has the potential to be that caliber of player to not, and he's not on a max deal because of what happened before he signed his extension, like, or he's on a
He's
max deal, he's not on a
right.
super max deal because
Right.
of what happened before the extension. Like he is an incredibly valuable player to Memphis from a front office perspective as you just look at constructing a basketball team, from a box office perspective because he's incredibly exciting and is going to sell tickets, and from a fan perspective that's going to keep people engaged. Like I think that all of that makes him incredibly valuable to this team. And so like no, I agree with
Well,
what
you could
Zach
all
said.
you could also, if you want to, and again, we're not right now. This conversation is just gaming stuff out, right? If you want to game it out, I think everything you said is exactly correct. If you want to game it out on the other side of that, because of the off court stuff and the frequency of missed games he's had, even if you wanted to trade Ja Morant, this would not be peak value to trade Ja Morant. And so the enormous value he has as a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, the potential value he has to you as a player, to me, far exceeds the potential value he
Far
has as a trade.
exceeds.
It's a trade chip right now. And so just following the logic of the situation should bring you to the obvious conclusion, which I am dead certain is the team's conclusion, which is that their first, second, third, and fourth choice is to win with Ja Morant.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, he's incredibly, incredibly valuable. I think we can move on from this. Like, yeah, we needed to address it because it was a very strong quote from Zach Kleiman, but I think he
Right.
answered the questions, right? They're not trading Ja. At least I wouldn't expect, yeah, I would
He,
not expect them to trade Ja.
he's setting the precedent.
That's the safest way of putting it. But yeah, like it seems pretty obvious that that's not happening at this
he,
point.
he's setting a precedent, though. Every time there's a stray comment about the Grizzlies on some podcast, man, we're going to blow up Zach Kleiman's phone looking for a quote.
I don't think he's going to be, racing to answer trade questions about, some of these other players. But Ja's a big one for sure. Okay, you did a couple of mailbags. That word was escaping me there for a minute.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about those, but first, let's take a break for a message from our sponsor.
Want to make a big impact without getting lost in a big system? Join Youth Villages to be a force for families while becoming part of one. Help make positive changes on a national scale, one community at a time. It takes a family to transform lives. Start with yours. Apply now at youthvillages.org/careers.
Was there any particular question you're having to break these up into two pieces now because you get so many questions.
And even the ones I do are super long. And I still leave lots of questions unanswered, but I try to answer as many as I feel like I can get away with.
I was curious to ask you, what was the best question you got? Which one did you like exploring the most?
Oh, see, this is the kind of thing I wish you had prepped me in advance you were going to ask, because I can't even remember like all the questions, in fact, the first mailbag feels like a month ago, even though it was like 4 days ago.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, I got into a little bit of the playoff matchup thing, which I think a lot of people have been asking about. I've been asked about on the radio for like the last month, and I've sort of pushed off that question because I hadn't sat down to think about it. So this was really the first time. This was sort of a first like toe in the pool. This will be going to this more in the weeks ahead. But this was really the first time I sat down and like looked at like what are the most likely playoff matchups, what seems like a good playoff matchup, what doesn't. That was something that like I hadn't really gotten into before. There was a question about how good the Grizzlies are, relative to like the 56 win team 3 years ago. That was my lead question on the first mailbag.
So who are the good matchups for the Grizzlies in the first round in your eyes?
Well, among the more likely, like I like the Phoenix matchup, but I don't think that's very likely. Among the more likely, I think the Kings, Wolves, and the Mavs, given the Mavs injury questions with Anthony Davis, I think that's sort of the top tier for me, those three teams. And I think the worst matchup, if everyone's healthy, and there's a lot of variance there, but if everyone's healthy, meaning Kawhi Leonard, the Clippers matchup like worries me the most. As I look at it, it seems like the most likely matchups are the Wolves, Clippers, Mavs. It's probably going to be one of those three teams more than likely.
Yeah, the Clippers have just given them so much trouble, and I did go to that game honestly just before the All-Star break and checked out Intuit Dome. Very very nice arena, but around it not a whole lot to do, at least not yet. And the vibe around that team is just bizarre. Because it feels like they could be very good, but the energy in the building was just very like tame, if that makes sense, for that Clippers game. And I have a hard time like trying to figure out if they're like a legit playoff team or if the energy around that is just not as strong because it doesn't feel like they're any sort of like real contender. But they're clearly a bad matchup for Memphis. Like Jaren really struggled in that game. And they were bringing a lot of double teams, and what I noticed about that game was that they, from the beginning, essentially double teamed Jaren. And early in the game, it was Jaren getting double teamed and then dumping it down to Zach Edey, and Zach Edey either finishing the play or fumbling the ball. And it was like feast or famine. And then they took away that pass. And as soon as they did that, it was just interception, interception,
Yeah.
interception, running the other way. So they are a tough matchup for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, I think the Clippers are a bad matchup over on multiple levels. Their perimeter defense exacerbates the Grizzlies' biggest problem, which is their turnover situation. I think Ivaka Zubats, I think his physicality neutralizes Zach Edey's physicality and more so. And then I think if Kawhi Leonard is on, that's a hard guy for the Grizzlies to guard just because, they don't have great size on the perimeter defensively. So I think there's sort of a bad matchup three ways. Thinking about your question more, let me, just in case for listeners who are not readers, and we encourage you to be readers, but these mailbags were subscriber only. Let me go back to that other question that I thought about in response to you asking what the best question was. That question about comparing this year's team to the team, that breakthrough team 3 years ago, 2000, I think 21-22, that won 56 games.
Yep.
The comparison to me was pretty interesting. So the 2021-22 team, that team won 56 games, but finished a distant second in the West. They had the 4th ranked offense and the 6th ranked defense. This year's team is on a 55 win pace. They were 56 win pace before they lost that game to the Clippers. They are a distant second in the West. They have the 5th ranked offense and the 7th ranked defense. So this is like almost identical stuff. And here was the funny thing to me. The top 11 players, the Grizzlies 10-man rotation got altered in the playoffs because Steven Adams pulled out and Tillman went in, right? So there are basically 11 players who played serious minutes in the playoffs for the Grizzlies in 2021-22. Those 11 players average age was 24.1. 3 years later, the same core 3 players, Ja Morant, Desmond Bane, Jared Jackson, the top 11 players on this roster this season, the average age, 24.1. Back to where they once belonged, man.
Yeah. Still young, still beaming with potential.
Yep.
Beaming with potential. You want to know one of my questions that I enjoyed from this and answers that I enjoyed from this is you were asked about whether or not they'll actually ever pay the tax. I'm glad you actually pointed out that they made trades that would have firmly put they like
made offers,
reportedly made offers for trades that would have firmly put them in the tax, because that's something that I feel like gets misconstrued a lot. Right? Is they're never going to pay the tax. I don't think that that's true. I think they will pay the tax. I just think that it has to be the right situation for the team to pay the tax. And yeah, like the Bridges trade, the Durant trade, like if either of those were to happen, which they were reportedly involved in those players, they'd be paying the tax right now. And eventually they will, right? Like if they want to keep this core of 3 together.
I suspect, and this is more reading the tea leaves, putting puzzle pieces together. I suspect that I think they are firmly committed. I think we both believe that they are 100% committed to retain Jared Jackson by any means necessary. So once they do that, that contract is going to be so big that I think it's going to be hard to not be in the tax to have a competitive team with Jaren on that next contract. And I think if that is almost inevitable, I think that leads them to try to avoid it if they can before they get to that point, because there may be no avoiding when they get to that point.
Yeah. Well, the fact that somebody even asked that question to you, it's like no one's actually going to believe it until that happens. Right?
100%.
That's just the type of situation that they're in. Like no one's going to believe that they're going to pay the tax until they actually end up paying the tax. But I don't think that they are like firmly saying that they're going to be a no tax team. Like,
well, I have grown more skeptical about it only because I thought coming out of last season, I thought there was a good chance they'd be in the tax this season. I didn't see them being able to thread the needle and like get a new starting center and keep Luke Kennard and do what they. I didn't see them doing what they needed to do and avoiding the tax. They were able to do it. They were able to thread the needle, and so I wasn't critical about it. But I thought naturally filling the holes they had was going to put them there, and it didn't happen this season.
What, 28 games left for the Grizzlies now?
Yep, at Indiana tonight. Match of 2 good teams. I think Indiana's like 4th or 5th in the East, and so good game there.
Yeah. Good game. And then we got a back-to-back here to start off. The Grizzlies do have a challenging schedule the rest of the way. I think Denver's what, a half game back now? Where do we
Yeah, yeah. Denver's a
where
half
are
game
we
back of the Grizzlies.
projecting this Grizzlies team to finish? Do you think that it's gonna be a question? How far do we think that they could potentially slip back? And obviously, it doesn't look like anybody's catching OKC, so we all know that second's just about as high as they could finish. I mean, what's the best and worst case scenario here?
So I think the reasonable range, barring some kind of collapse, they're going to be somewhere 2 through 5. And I think there will likely be 2-3. The Lakers lost last night, so I think they're like 3.5 games up on the Lakers, who are fifth. That's a pretty good cushion with 28 games to go. So if the Grizzlies keep trucking along and winning at like a normal clip, I think they'll probably be the 2 or the 3. But that half a game, I mean, that's a total toss up. With Denver. One interesting thing I'll throw out there. This is a subscription only Substack that I'm sure no one listening to this has read. And I actually gave them money because it was like the third time in the last month something's popped up I wanted to read, and it finally got me. But Royce Webb, who was the who I know a little bit, he was the editor at ESPN.com's NBA site years ago, back when it was a better site, frankly, than it is now. He has his own Substack thing, and he has different people writing on it. And he is this guy named Jeremis, I'm going to mispronounce his name maybe, Jeremias Engelman, who used to be an in-house analyst for the Dallas Mavs. And he's writing for Royce Webb Substack now. He wrote a thing a few weeks ago that got a lot of attention, even though no one could read it unless you were a subscriber, about the Luka Doncic trade. Because he had been in-house with Dallas and had actually pitched Dallas on trading Luka like years ago. And so he had this really interesting piece on that. But he did a piece yesterday, which got me to finally subscribe, on ranking the teams in the West the rest of the way. And this is the guy who, when he was at ESPN, came up with the real plus minus stat that ESPN has. And so he looked at the rosters post-trade deadline, adjusted them for what playoff rotations would be, and ranked who we thought the best teams were in terms of playoff basketball going forward. And he had the Grizzlies still second. He had the Grizzlies rated, he had a close second. He had a distant second, Oklahoma City, and a big drop down, and then a cluster. But he did have the Grizzlies atop that cluster when you factor in increased minutes for Morant, increased minutes for Jaren, increased minutes for Desmond Bane. So I thought it was interesting. He had like Dallas and Oklahoma and Golden State up, assuming health, which Dallas probably won't have. He had other teams moving down, Houston moving down a lot. But he had the Grizzlies staying firm as second. So, if you were looking for some evidence to believe in this Grizzlies team beyond just what they've done in this regular season, there's a smart guy who thinks they're as good as their record says they are.
Yeah, I do. I think Denver's the one, right? Denver's, and they don't have an easy schedule either, but they're going to be a challenge to hold off, I think. You want to have a first round playoff series, right? I think fifth would be disappointing. You want to have home court for your first round playoff series. So I should say.
So on the strength of schedule thing, since you brought that up, because it feels like I just looked that up. It feels like people have been saying for 2 months the Grizzlies have the hardest schedule the rest of the way, and it just keeps being true. In terms of opponent strength of schedule, that's setting aside like the home road and all of that. The Grizzlies now have the fourth hardest remaining schedule. It's all bundled up. I mean, the Lakers have the hardest. This is according to Tankathon. Memphis is fourth, Sacramento's third, Denver's fifth, the Clippers are sixth. Basically, like all these teams in the West have like similarly hard schedules the rest of the way, with a couple of exceptions.
Yeah. So it's going to be an interesting race for sure there. Vince Williams Jr., your guy, he's going to be very important. Very important. As you said on this podcast multiple times. I'm interested to see, to me, outside of Ja, he's the guy to be watching these last 28 games.
I agree. I think you got to watch for his minutes, which have been low so far.
I think they're going to increase.
Right. His minutes, for one, his minutes, two, his role, and three, his performance offensively. I think I don't have much. To me, I know what he is defensively, I think. But offensively, I think, he hasn't really played that much NBA basketball. I think there's a lot of variance in what he could do offensively, good or bad.
Yeah, his impact is obviously, very good. And I mentioned it last week, but just I love the fact that he plays with his hair on fire, and I think it shows in some of the advanced tracking stuff. He's definitely going to be a very interesting player to keep an eye on as the team goes through the rest of the season. So I'm going to be watching for him. I may end up writing about him at some point. So that has been fun. I got to be a little sentimental. Can I get sentimental, Chris? I guess sentimental may not be the right word, but like I just think we had a great month covering the Grizzlies in February. Like it has been a great month. I'm not trying to pat ourselves on the back too much, but like you nailed that trade. These mailbags are awesome. I was excited about the Bane stuff, the Kennard piece about him getting the court named after him, and I thought our All-Star content was good. So I'm really happy. I think we had a good month. I think we had a great month of Grizzlies coverage. You know, I'm pretty excited about what we did.
I agree. Good for us. Thanks for everyone listening. I encourage again anyone listening who is not a Daily Memphis subscriber to be a subscriber. Some things we write you can read without being a subscriber, but a lot of it you can't. And so we definitely encourage you to subscribe and check out all the stuff we're working on.
And also that they want people to fill out the surveys to tell us how you think we're doing over at the Daily Memphian. So if you have time to go do that, you should go do that. If you go read the most recent newsletter, it's Kenrich Williams talking about Desmond Bane. There's a link to go do the survey, tell us how we're doing, what you do like about the Daily Memphian, what you don't like about the Daily Memphian. All opinions are welcome. But we appreciate it. As always, thanks for listening. Go check out all of our stuff over at the Daily Memphian. For Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.